Greetings, everyone. Welcome back. It is Chapter 3 of Introduction to Art, The Significance of Materials Used in Art. So we're going to be talking about some learning outcomes here. After completing this chapter, you should be able to describe the differences among evaluation of art materials, especially with regard to intrinsic qualities of raw material versus produced objects. And we'll talk about this terminology, so don't worry. Discuss the differences between monetary and cultural values for works of art. Discuss the idea of borrowed significance that comes with the reuse of components from previous artworks. Bear in mind, this is the section that talks about what's called spolia. And finally, describe the significance of value added to objects by complex artistic processes or by changing tastes in different eras. All right, well, let's get going. This is a book illumination called The Annunciation to the Shepherds. And let's see here. I'm going to hide something. There we go. Okay. Now, the book talks about the fact that the gold leaf that's been applied to this parchment adds to the value. It's what's called the intrinsic value of a work of art. Intrinsic means what's built in. So in other words, the gold leaf is considered to have a value because of the value of the gold. Now, the question is, I'm not completely convinced, and I don't know if you would be either, that the gold leaf increases a monetary value of the work of art. It would cost more to make, but does that necessarily mean it's worth more on the art market? I'm not quite sure. And then, of course, there's the cultural value of a work of art, its significance at the time of its production for those people who made it or for whom it was made, right? But the question is, does the gold leaf actually add to any kind of cultural value? And I'm not denying the appeal of the gold leaf. I think it looks great. Personally, I like it. But the question is this actually a good example of the inherent value of a work of art, or what they're calling the intrinsic value? I've got an example toward the end of this slideshow that has a somewhat different take on this question. So let's keep moving. So, utility and value of materials. Now, the book makes a really interesting point that early art materials, as far as we know, were of a very low intrinsic value. So, in the case of the cave painting or the reproduction of the cave painting on the left-hand side of the screen, uh, the art supply, so to speak, that the artists used would have been very inexpensive. Not perhaps that meaning that they were easy to make in a sense, because paint would have had to have been mixed up. So it was a matter of, say, mixing animal fat with some kind of pigment or maybe soot from a fire. So it wasn't like it was without some kind of, kind of like a production. There was an issue of the production. And then the same can be true of the Korean Neolithic pot here. That's just dirt dug up, clay dug up from the ground and then fired. The book makes it sound like it was fired in a kind of like a campfire. It might have been fired in some kind of primitive kiln, say. But the material itself was rather inexpensive, easy to come by. And then, interestingly, though, when we get to the right-hand side, this porcelain that was made, that produced this vase, was used to produce this vase on the right-hand side. That was a little more difficult to come by. Originally a Chinese secret for a long time, and then sort of stolen and rediscovered in Europe about 300 years ago. But all these, especially the two on the right hand, excuse me, the left hand side, the earliest works of art that we know of were made of materials that were very inexpensive. Precious materials, spolia, and borrowed glory. This section, I think, is really one of the most interesting in the whole textbook. So we have the sarcophagus of Constantina. A sarcophagus is basically a coffin. And this coffin, sarcophagus, appropriates imperial Roman material and imagery that was used during a transition in the Roman Empire, the late Roman Empire, from Roman paganism to Christianity. This is made from porphyry, which is a kind of marble. And at the time, it was only available through royal quarries, and it dropped from out of use when the quarries were no longer being used. So what's interesting here is the Christian emperor of Rome had this made for his daughter out of this traditional Imperial Roman material, the porphyry or marble, and it uses both Roman, what's shown is both pagan Roman and Christian iconographic or, symbolic pictorial elements. Now, another interesting example here is the Palace Chapel of Charlemagne in present-day Germany. He had reused porphyry columns from the Roman Empire, presumably made 500 or so years before his palace chapel was created. He borrowed the pillars, permanently borrowed, stole, in other words. This is called spolia, where you take someone else's product and use it as your own, not just as a way of upcycling, but also claiming the past glory, so to speak, of your predecessors. And then we have the ambon or pulpit of Henry II. This uses elements that were also borrowed from previous non-Christian cultures as a way of filling in details. And I sort of think it's not necessarily to borrow, to reclaim the glory of the past, but also to recognize the quality of workmanship that was available in the past. Although you can see from this that by the 11th century of the Common Era, the level of workmanship is actually quite good. Not all of this is reclaimed materials. Now, the liquidation of treasures, this is interesting because a lot of things are gone. Things that had a high intrinsic value, like the silver altarpiece on the left, or the screen of Charlemagne, also made of precious metals and apparently jewels. These would have been dismantled and stolen during times of crisis in order to feed the hungry, say, pay for a war, or as spoils of victory by someone else. Wood inlay and lacquer, these are relatively less expensive materials in some ways, but can be quite rare. Wood was a very common material in medieval, especially Northern Europe. A lot of statues were carved from it, and it's a common material, and yet it's transformed into something quite spectacular through carving, gilding, which is the application of gold leaf, and painting. The example in the middle is from the United States. Again, common hardwoods available in North America, yet assembled with such exquisite care that this chest is really something spectacular. And then the lacquer on the right-hand side, not an expensive material in one sense that it's derived from pitch, or I think it's derived from tree pitch. Sorry, I'm not sure the exact origin, but the process of layering it on wood is quite intricate, and it's only available in China, this particular material available for layering, at least in this original form. Intrinsic value and enhanced worth of metals. Here we have the reliquary statue of Saint Foy in France. Saint Foy or Saint Faith. Foy means faith in French. This is late 10th to early 11th century golden gemstones over a wooden core. This is interesting because it both apparently borrows the head of a Roman emperor from a gold statue, and has gems and other materials embedded in the gold. Um, Quite an amazing work of art in itself. But think of the high intrinsic value from the gold as a metal, and also the important cultural value because of the worth of this object to early Christian pilgrims who would have visited this because it had a relic of Saint Foy inside of it. Rare materials and prohibited uses. Things like ivory are no longer legally traded in most places, but were more commonly used and traded in the past. And material connotations of class or station, meaning kind of like signals or symbols of a social class or one's position in society. This is Do Hosu's Sum 1. It shows a Korean imperial robe, but it is created from military dog tags from Korean service people. And apparently, the commentary is there is mandatory conscription in South Korea, and the artist is making the point that Korea's power depends on this sacrifice of people willing to serve, or well, it's mandatory that they serve in the military. They have no choice. So something to think about, or a few things. What's the intrinsic value of the materials in your chosen work of art? What's your painting's monetary value on the art market today? And maybe what was its monetary value when it was created? And then is its cultural value different when it was made versus now? Has it increased or decreased in its sort of worth to society? And then I'll let you review on your own these learning outcomes, just to kind of review the idea of the valuation of art materials, what's intrinsic versus what's cultural and what's monetary. So thanks for joining me, and I will see you in chapter 4.